Everybody's had some adventures. Everybody's had a few close calls. Everybody's got a story. What's yours?
Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 30 of Cool Story with David J. McNeil. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your continued support. This episode is a departure from the Cool Story norm, as my buddy Paul Papadopoulos will play the role of the host this episode, and I will be sitting in the hot seat. Paul is a writer, director, producer, and professor of film and television production at Loyalist College. Not long ago, Paul and his wife Lisa reached out to Belinda and I about doing a Zoom call to discuss our experiences moving to and living in Costa Rica. It was not the first time we had done so, and Paul and Lisa were aware of this. We had done half a dozen similar calls over the past year with friends who were inspired by our journey and were interested in the possibilities that Costa Rica could offer, as well as being a digital nomad. 2 of those calls actually materialized into action. My friend Joe and his wife Grace, who I know from riding motorcycles with Chapter 383 of the Southern Cruisers Riding Club in Toronto, bought an amazing 2-bedroom condo just steps away from Main Street and the beach in Coco. It's an investment and a winter getaway for them. Also, my fellow producer and colleague Andrew and his wife Brenda bought a stunning Ocotal Beach cliffside house with spectacular views of the Papagayo Bay. So with all of that collected interest, that's when Paul suggested that we do an episode where he interviewed me in order to share this story with our followers and friends. That was the genesis of this very special edition of Cool Story. But before we jump into my chat with Paul, I'd like to point out that this episode is dedicated to our wonderful friend Jim Clark, who passed away last week. Jim was a lovely guy who was very generous with his time. I know that because when Jim found out that Belinda and I were interested in buying a live-aboard boat, he immediately offered me his massive experience as a captain, fisherman, and powerboat dweller to aid in our hunt to find the perfect vessel. And of course, I accepted. Jim and I spent a lot of the winter of 2018-2019 discussing, researching, and debating the best boat for mine and Belinda's purposes. We then traveled together around Ontario and Quebec, climbing up and down icy ladders, inspecting multiple boats on blocks, wrapped away for the winter in plastic. With Jim's help, we eventually found the perfect boat for us. And then he and our common buddy Ian Partridge offered to help me pilot the boat from Montreal back to Toronto on its maiden voyage. So Jim was absolutely pivotal in making our dreams come true. We will always remember him for that. And his name will come up from time to time in this podcast. We miss him a lot. But let's get right to it. Here is my chat with Mr. Paul Papadopoulos.
Dave McNeil, Pura Vida. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, man. Nice to talk to you.
Nice talking to you. Oh, good. I'm indestructible, or at least trying to remain that way in these crazy times.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit envious. I got to admit, every time I'm seeing your posts or talking to you via Zoom or whatever, I'm envious of your situation. I have to admit, a little bit green.
Well, no, it's been a pretty good place to ride out a pandemic. I got to tell you, though, I'm really homesick, and I'd like to be back in Toronto soon. When we took off, we didn't expect to be gone this long. So yeah, I miss home, and I miss a lot of our family and friends back there too. So
that's totally understandable. I mean, not a bad place to be in the situation we're in. Absolutely. But nonetheless, here I am in Prince Edward County. There you are in Costa Rica, in Playas del Coco.
Yeah.
So let's let people know, how do we know each other, first of all?
I believe we met while we were both working at the CBC. I was working on the after-school kids show, The X. I was playing a character called Bad Dog Tremblay. And at the time, you were producing a sports show called POV Sports.
Yeah.
And my buddy Joe Motiki was the host of that show, who I've known since the late 90s. I started working with Joe back in the day on TVO Kids, and we're great friends. And he introduced me to you. I believe that's when we first met. Worked a bit at YTV back in the day, doing some acting on different shows and stuff. I know you were there as well.
I produced a few things, or I was a producer on a few shows, definitely. I have 4 or 5 different iterations of The Zone, The Anti-Gravity Room, Crunch, a variety of different things at YTV. And I don't think we actually crossed paths at YTV. It was at CBC, thanks to Jose, as I call him. Joe's a character, man. And I know he's listening right now. What's up, Jose?
Yeah, Joe was also the very first guest on the show.
That's right. Yeah.
And we got married twice. We got married. Belinda and I were married twice. We were married in Toronto, and then we were married here in Costa Rica. And Joe was the best man at my wedding in Toronto. So yeah, he's a great friend of mine.
Great connection. Yeah, we went to Ryerson together, and we did our time at university, and then went our separate ways. Him at TVO, myself at YTV, and then 7 years later, boom, we were at CBC, and hired him as a host, and spent a few years having a lot of fun traveling around North America and meeting new people. Like you.
Known each other for good 18, 19 years, I guess now.
That's right. Yeah.
Time flies, man.
Indeed. And flying. Yeah. Your life, I mean, since then has changed so much. I mean, everybody knows you're in Costa Rica. We just talked about it. You're in Costa Rica. My question, and there's been many questions, this is the cool thing, is that we reconnected because of your, I don't know if I want to call it an adventure, but I guess I would call it an adventure. Your adventure to Costa Rica and living there, and it's been inspiring to so many people. My wife Lisa and myself included. It's been such an inspiration to see you do what you guys are doing. You and Belinda making your way down there and making it work. And it's kind of one of those situations where so many people dream about it, but never really know how to make it happen or how that's going to happen. And it is just simply that, a dream. And when people see you make it happen, they go, oh, wow, must have won the millions. You know, he must have done something incredible to make this work. And I know, speaking to you, that it isn't some crazy story like that. It's very real, very realistic, and encouraged us to reach out and say, hey, you're in Costa Rica. How'd you make that work? I don't think I'm the only person who's asked these questions. And I know this is why we're talking tonight, is because of how many people have been asking you questions on how did you make this work? How do we get down there? What are the steps we take? And it's made a lot of people, ourselves included, do a heck of a lot of research to see how do we make this work for us. So how did you get down there initially?
Over the years, I had always thought it would be nice to eventually live in, a warmer place, in a tropical country, a Spanish-speaking country. Like everybody else, during the winter, I'd gone away and stayed on vacations in Cuba and Mexico and the Dominican, all that kind of stuff. I like that lifestyle, and always kind of thought it would be cool to eventually live in a place like that. That idea, though, seems so far away because I'm still working. I plan to work for a long time. I enjoy working. I'm not planning on retiring anytime soon. But Belinda and I got married in May of 2018 in Costa Rica, about 15 miles or 15 kilometers, I should say, from where we live right now at Riu Palace. While we were here, we toured around. We went diving. We went out on a booze cruise that launched from here in Playas del Coco. So we got a chance to check out the town, and we thought it was really cool. And we met a real estate agent who became friends of ours on Facebook. And then we went home, and that was kind of it. Then one day in the mail, we received a flyer from a real estate agent who was telling us that same condo as ours, the same unit, 2-bedroom, facing the same way, everything on a different floor than ours, had just sold for twice what we had paid for our condo 3 years before. And Belinda and I were starting our kind of lives all over. It was our, both of our second relationship. And we were, we had a new condo and a new mortgage and all that kind of stuff. And a mortgage that we were going to be paying for quite a long time. And when we got that in the mail, we were like, wow. Could you imagine if we could sell our place for that amount of money and what we could do instead? And within a couple of days, we just hatched this idea to sell our place, take that money, buy a place down here, and then figure out how to still live in Toronto for half of the year. And that's when we came up with the idea to get a really nice boat to live on in the summer, because we had friends that live on boats and we knew what that was about. And that's kind of how it all started.
And that boat adventure, I mean, that, I think as we go along here, I think there's some special people, I'm sure you want to give some shout outs to as you tell this tale, right? Like there's some pretty special people that were involved in that boating adventure, no?
Yeah, you're referring to a friend of ours named Jim, sadly, who passed away on Tuesday, a guy named Jim Clark, who's a good friend of ours who he lived on his boat with his partner Nadine Dupont. I know her from television. She's somebody who hires me a lot to work for TFO, French broadcaster in Ontario. We've been friends for a long time. Jim spent a lot of time with me in 2018 and 2019 as we were looking around for a boat. He asked me if if he could help out in our search for a boat. And I spent a couple months with him traveling around, visiting marinas in the winter and climbing on the boats in the cold that were wrapped in plastic up on blocks, checking out boats and back and forth. We'd sometimes drive to Montreal and back in the day and look at boats there. And he had all kinds of advice and input. And finally, when we did buy a boat with his help, he and another buddy, Ian Partridge, who's also a TV industry guy and editor and buddy of mine, those guys helped me bring the boat back from Montreal. And he was instrumental in making this big life change that Belinda and I were embarked on. And so he passed away this week, which is very sad. So thank you for mentioning that. Yeah.
Condolences on that, by the way. Just it seemed right to talk about, somebody, these kind of adventures, you meet some special people and the adventures would not unfold the way they would if it weren't for these great people in our lives that we meet. And I think to tell this story without mentioning Jim, I think would be a disservice to your whole situation, really. I mean, it seems like he was so instrumental at the beginning of something that led to where you are today, right?
Yeah. And he had a lifetime of experience living on boats and working on boats. And he was a captain, and he taught me so much about navigation and all of those things that we need to learn quickly before we moved onto a boat. So like I said, he was instrumental in that big step that we took. So yeah, you know what? I think when I go back to Toronto in the summer and I step onto that boat every year, I'm gonna think about him and how much of an input he had in making this dream come true for us. So yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a few people I'm sure that you're going to mention along the way. Like you talked about the real estate agent. Is this the same real estate agent that you're still friends with today? Roland
Tipper and his wife Nadine, we met them on a catamaran tour. They were out with some of their clients, and we met them, and I heard a guy talking to somebody else next to me, and I could tell he was Canadian. So I said, "Oh, where are you from?" We started chatting them up. We became friends on Facebook. And then so when we finally came up with this idea to come down here, get a place and do the whole boat thing, we looked him up, and within a few months we were staying at the condo they own down here, and Belinda and I were touring around, visiting houses and condos and trying to figure out where we were going to be living. And since then, those two, Nadine and Roland, have become really good friends of ours, and they've helped two of our friends purchase homes down here. You mentioned other friends that reached out. We've had a number of friends that we've done Zoom calls with who wanted to talk about how did you guys get down here and all the questions that you kind of were asking us. My buddy Joe Stapleton, that I used to ride motorcycles with in a club in Toronto, he and his wife Grace came down here. I introduced them to Roland. They went out and shopped around. They bought a 2-bedroom condo that's going to be an investment property for them, and then eventually, I think they're thinking of maybe eventually living down here once they're retired. And then my friend Andrew and his wife Brenda, he's a television producer as well. I've worked with at Bell, and I work with sometimes at Loblaw. They just bought a house here as well. So yeah, I think we've inspired some people. And, I'm still getting calls from people and texts from people saying we'd like to chat with you guys about, how you made this work.
Which I think is why we need to talk tonight. This is why we're talking.
Yeah.
It's funny because obviously because of your background in TV production, it seems like, you're attracting a lot of TV industry people. What do you think about, if I get down there and we get a few people down there, we start up our own production company? Is that something you want to do?
If anybody wants to come down here and work here, they should really look into how you do that, right? Because there's, obviously this country has devices set up to protect people who work here from losing jobs to people who come in and whatnot. And, there are laws and there are rules and stuff and about what you can do down here, what type of work, and whether or not you have to become a citizen to work down here. So that's something people should look into. It's not something I'm really that well versed on because I haven't been looking to start a company down here so far or looking for work here. I have work from back home that I simply do remotely. So that hasn't been an issue for me, but it's doable, and it's just a matter of getting your ducks in a row to figure out how to do it.
Absolutely. And I think I'm asking that question sort of tongue in cheek. I think, by the time I get down there with my wife, I think it's more about relaxing and doing the odd remote job here and there. So realistically, I think it's more about enjoying ourselves getting down there. Now that's different for you because you just mentioned something that is on so many people's minds is the idea of working remotely. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously that's been forced upon so many of us due to the pandemic. You were doing that prior to the pandemic. So for you specifically with the work that you're doing, how is that increased or is there a status quo that's been maintained for the level or the quantity of gigs you've been getting? How does that affect you?
Well, I have a number of clients that I work for and have worked for a number of years. I've been lucky. Also worked pretty hard, and I've done a good job for my clients. So I won't get into the list of clients specifically, but I have a bunch of clients that I work for, and I work with my partner Dave, who was an editor, and he and I just a few years ago we were working out of an edit suite in Toronto, but we didn't work for anybody in that building. We build and work for people who were based out of Montreal mostly. And so we didn't need to be in that building. So we started talking to them about getting out of there and working from home. And the big pitch was just that there would be no difference in the quality of the service, but there would be more of an opportunity for our client in terms of if there was an issue, they could call us on the weekend and we could fix it on the weekend, that we were always at the edit suite, right? So that was a plus for them. And then there was changes in technology. We were able to kind of get off the grid. We weren't using tapes anymore, of course, and all that kind of stuff. And we just figured out how we could get everything done that we did out of that building and do it at home. And we kind of went down the list and figured it all out and then pitched our clients, and they said, yeah, sure. And then we were working from home. So he and I have been working from home now for over 3 years. So when this came along, that was just that part of the equation wasn't really an issue. We were ready to go.
Ready to go, yeah. So let's back up a second here, because you talked about the different sunny locales that you'd visited and liked the lifestyle and so on. Why specifically did you get married in Costa Rica, and why specifically did you end up choosing to live there?
You know what? I had never been, before we got married, we had never been to Costa Rica. I just heard so many amazing things about Costa Rica over the years, and it just kept coming up and coming up and coming up. I had been to other places, I've been to Mexico. I know a lot of people who own property in Mexico and enjoy it there. I didn't quite have that same feeling for Mexico. Dominican, didn't have that feeling for the Dominican either. Cuba, obviously, that's, there's some issues there that haven't been sorted out. And, but Costa Rica just kept coming up. And then when we came down here, we met a real estate agent, started talking to people who live down here, started looking at the quality of life and researched the hell out of it. We've been talking about that. You're the same sort of person in terms of before you do things, you really research it. And that's what I was doing. I was reading books. I've pretty much seen every YouTube video anybody's ever produced about Playa del Coco or the region. And so researched it, and just started figuring it out. And we were just like, yeah, we really like the idea of coming down here. And plus at the end of the day too, we jumped without a parachute, and we thought, well, you know what, if we don't like it, we could sell our place there and move somewhere else. Right. I mean, we've already made the big risky move, right? And just because we do something doesn't mean we have to do it for the rest of our lives. We can switch it up, and we can change our minds. So yeah. We just kind of looked at it that way. So
there's so many places. I mean, Costa Rica, for anybody who doesn't, and you're living there, so there's so much variety as far as climate, as far as geography. You can be in the mountains, you can be in a lake by a volcano, you could be on the Caribbean side, the Pacific side, so on and so forth. What is it about where you are specifically, Playa del Coco, that made you settle there as opposed to maybe the city like San Jose or Limon on the Caribbean side or somewhere else in the country? Why Playa del Coco?
Well, one thing was we didn't know a lot of those other places and didn't know anybody who lived there. I have a few friends that own places in other areas that are more remote. But the big thing is, well, first off is infrastructure, right? You got to have good internet to do what we do. For instance, it looks like I'm going to be doing a voice for a commercial next week. I'm going to get patched into a studio in Toronto. It's a national commercial. That has to be done, well. I need great internet. I can't be dropping the ball on something like that. So I can do that from my studio here. So we need great internet. We also, just in terms of infrastructure, the neighborhood that we live in here in Playa del Coco is called Las Palmas. It's a bit of a burb. There's lots of condos and there's lots of houses and stuff. It's not remote. It's not, it's still kind of rustic because it's Costa Rica, but it's got some infrastructure, and it makes it possible for us to run a business here out of our condo and not worry about power going out all the time and the internet going out all the time. I mean, those things happen, but it doesn't happen all the time. So that was a big thing, just the infrastructure. It's also a town that has got a really good mix of, there's about 4,000 or 5,000 people that live here, depending on what time of the year is, but there's over 80 restaurants in town. Any day of the week, I could go out and go deep sea fishing. I can go snorkeling. I can go diving. I can go hiking. I can go bike riding. I can do so many different things here. And then I can also jump in the car and drive out, go on sloth tours, or I can go zip lining. Everything's just so close because it's not a massive country. Everything's in close proximity, but we also have a really good base here.
And that's the thing, I guess, is when anybody's doing the research and like we're doing, like so many people are doing that are about to pull the trigger on buying a property, it's finding out where is the base if you're willing to do the travel once you get there, right? And explore more.
Yeah.
And I think, like when we're looking at this, we're looking at Playa del Coco almost exclusively. However, we're looking at properties in Playa Hermosa, Playa Ocotal, which are neighboring beaches, neighboring towns. But we're also looking further out, in Punta Arenas in the south and so on. If anybody's listening, whoever's listening to this and is not familiar with Costa Rica, get a map out. And as I'm saying, you'll see, as I'm saying these names, you'll see where these places are in relation to where you are, Playa del Coco, which is pretty much northwest, right? Northwest Costa Rica.
Yeah, northwest. We're just south of the Nicaragua border on the Pacific Ocean. So
one of the big things is, what is the major lifestyle change? Is just so vastly different to being in Toronto, to being in North America. What is the big change that is the most prominent thing to you?
I guess probably the biggest change, and this is what trips people up and people have to get their head wrapped around, is that North American idea that you just everything is, you can get everything at the click of a finger, right? When you live in a place like this, there are no malls. There are no, don't get me wrong. There's lots of great stores and places where you can shop around here. There's probably about 5 grocery stores in our small town, but there's even sort of there's a Price Smart, which is like a Costco just out of town, but there's no malls and there's no, none of that kind of stuff. So oftentimes you have to do a lot of research and figure out where you're going to get that thing that you need if you need it. The other thing too, I guess, is that idea that you make a phone call and things happen right away. That's not really the way things operate. Things take time here. People and industries and companies move slower. A lot of that's just by nature, the heat and how hot it is and stuff like that. Things happen at a slower pace than they do in North America, which is part of the reason why you also want to come here.
Yeah. Yep.
So a lot of the books that I read and a lot of the interviews that I listened to, that was the one thing that kept coming up. It was that if you're like an A-type personality, you better figure out whether or not this is a lifestyle that is going to work for you, because otherwise you might come down here and just lose your mind being frustrated over the pace of things. It's a big thing.
I think anybody who's traveled extensively or traveled regularly anyways, I think gets what you're talking about. I was lucky enough in my family, we traveled quite a bit in my youth, and then, moved around in the States and then to the Middle East for, my parents were in the Middle East and Bahrain for 16 years. Mm-hmm. So there's a major, I wouldn't say cultural shock, but it's certainly a paradigm shift with our lives as far as, that was concerned. So for us, it's something that, it's not going to be as shocking, I don't think. And I think anybody who has traveled, if you've traveled a lot, I think that idea of mingling and interacting with locals, and that's what I want to get to as well, is the idea of the difference between those who come and expect things to be like they were back home versus you. And I know we were talking a few weeks ago, and you were talking about how when you first came, the friendships that you developed almost immediately with the locals around where you were living. Tell me a bit about that.
Are you talking about ticos and ticas, people who are from here? Are you talking about expats or both? Or
I think ticos and ticas mainly, but expats, of course, we're all going to meet our, people from home or from other countries, of course, expats, but ticos and ticos specifically.
Yeah, well, I would say specifically in our neighborhood, it's mostly expats who live here or own properties. And then North America, a lot of North Americans or people from around the world, Europeans and stuff, who come to visit and rent here. In our neighborhood specifically, there aren't a ton of locals that live here, but there are a lot of locals who live specifically like right where we live. In the town, there's lots of neighborhoods that are where locals live. Ticos and ticas, that's the expression that they use to describe themselves. There are a lot of locals who live here in town, not specifically right where we are. We're building a house in a neighborhood a couple blocks over. That's going to be more of a Costa Rican neighborhood, traditional Costa Rican neighborhood there. But we've met a lot of locals here, mostly through business and relationships. Like we have people who work here on our property, gardeners, and people who work in the pool, and people who we've specifically right now. I'm a board member with our condo, and recently Belinda and I pitched the other condo owners to get gutters put in because it rains a lot, rain gutters. It really rains a lot during the green season, the sort of the monsoon season. And so we pitched that and they went for it. And so now we got crews who are putting in rain gutters and doing work on the property. And, we've met a lot of those people. Some of those people are our friends and, keep up with us through texts and stuff. And we've got, like, for instance, we've got a security guard named Napoleon, who's from Nicaragua, who, as soon as we got here, I went around and introduced myself to all these people, and we became friends and whatnot. And so we have nice relationships with those people. Napoleon will send me texts on my phone when we're away on vacation saying, I was concerned about something I saw on your patio. Did you leave this, or has somebody been on your patio? That kind of stuff. So we have relationships like that. And we have relationships with expats that we've met here. So all kinds of different relationships. So, I mean, that's why it's important to, as much as you can, to pick up the language as well, obviously. And I think, if you're going to come down here and live here and not pick up the language, also that's a little bit disrespectful to the people who live here. Not a little bit, quite a bit.
See, and that's what I was getting at. I think that's when you mentioned that when we're talking last time we spoke, I thought that was such a key thing, even in just traveling somewhere, is to, when you're interacting with locals, and to ingratiate yourself in their ways and not try and force your ways. I mean, that even happens for us here in Prince Edward County. There's an us versus them mentality. Mm-hmm. And it's predicated upon the fact that there's a lot of people the from out of town, or not from out of town, from away, from town, mm-hmm. from Toronto, from Ottawa, from Montreal, who come here. And, they don't necessarily embrace the lifestyle that has been here for a long time. 3, 4, 5 generations of people living here. And it's one thing, yeah, sure, you're from away and you're coming in. And like us, we try our best to interact with the locals and not impose our city ways, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of people who do, and complain about the smell of the pig farm down the road, or the noise from the farm. It's like, well, you moved here, you're not going to change it. So I think, and that's the same with, like, going to resorts and so on. It is learning the language and just being a human being. And I think that a lot of people lose that, or don't, not even lose it. They don't have that mentality, and they're the ones who are going to end up complaining about someplace. And do you find there's, and I don't want to get negative here, but do you find there's some of that? Is there a sense that there's people who come down and don't and have those expectations of what it's supposed to be like at home, and are looking to be served and catered to in the way they're expected?
Yeah, I'm sure there's some of that. I don't know how long those people last here, and I don't know how much of a great experience those people have, but I would say the majority of people who come down here are people who looked at this lifestyle, the quote unquote pura vida lifestyle, and thought, I want a piece of that, and came down here and embraced it fully. When I met Belinda, she had lived in Toronto for a few years, but she was originally from South Africa. And when she moved to Canada, one of the things that she did in the early days was she decided that she was going to embrace Canadian culture. And what that meant, she was going to learn what hockey was all about. She was going to watch hockey. She was going to watch baseball, and she went to hockey games. She became a fan of the Blue Jays. She became a fan of the Raptors, and she embraced all those things because she wanted to fit in. She had a lot of friends that spent a lot of their time hanging out with a South African expat group, which was fine. She did that for a while, but she was like, I'm not really going to integrate if I hang out with South Africans here. And that's what you have to do here as well. It's cool to hang out with expats and to, hang out with other Canadians and hang out with Americans and stuff, but it's also pretty cool to meet people who are from here and figure out what they're all about too. And those people, don't get me wrong, those people are actually a lot of people who live here in Costa Rica who are locals are eager to learn how to speak English because it just makes good business sense for them. So they're often eager to speak to you in English, but it's good obviously to reciprocate and to learn how to speak Spanish and to be able to fit in as much as you can, because at the end of the day too, no matter where you go, people are going to be speaking Spanish with you, and you got to get stuff done. And the more you can, understand the language and be able to get to the quick is super important.
Oh yeah, I think I'm sure it makes things so much smoother, so much friendlier, just so much more pleasant too, right?
Yeah.
So there's 3 main things when it comes down to basic necessities, and you mentioned a couple of them earlier, and that's electricity, internet, and phone service. Mm-hmm. So what do we need to think about or expect when we're thinking about coming down to Costa Rica, and specifically, I guess, where you are, but for the rest of the country? I know you mentioned something about having battery backups when you're doing your work, so you don't get interrupted. All that stuff. The internet, first of all, then electricity and phone.
Yeah. So the big thing is obviously internet And since we have lived here, since we moved here in October of 2019, I've seen that there's a lot more competition for internet. There's also a lot more talk recently about the government is talking about putting through a new program to attract digital nomads, people who want to travel and work remotely, to come down here. And what they're talking about doing is putting through a program where you can come and live here for a year and get a visa for a year and not have to leave the country every 90 days, which you have to do right now. If you're not a resident, you have to leave and then come back in. So you would be able to live here for a year without having to leave. And then at the end of the year, you could reapply and get another 1 year visa for this program to work here as a digital nomad, which I think obviously is going to be quite enticing for a lot of people who just figure it out in this past, year. I don't know how long it's been. What has it been? Like a year and a half now. A little bit. Yeah. Like 16 months or something like that. All those people who figured out that they can work from home. And people used to always say, you got to figure out how to be able to work from home, but it's not just working from home now. Now it's working from anywhere. So there's more internet, which is what we started talking about. There's more internet companies, and the internet is better than it was when I got here. We've got trucks driving around the neighborhood with loudspeakers on top every once in a while, boasting about their internet service and their fiber optic service. I remember that not long ago, you and I were chatting, and I had my phone in my hand. I was talking about the internet, and I pulled up the speed test to see how fast my internet was. And it was like, what was it? 85 or 85 megabytes per second or whatever. And you were like, I'm lucky if I get 20 here.
That's right. I'm here. I am in Canada, back home in Canada. I mean, I'm in Prince Edward County, and I'm in a rural setting. But here you are in Costa Rica, halfway south around the world, and you're getting 3 times better internet than I am. So that's impressive.
Yeah, and I think when we got here and we bought the place, the lady who owned the place said, well, to make it easier, do you want to go down to the, local internet office, the provider, and I'll just switch it all over to you and you can take it over? And I was like, sure. And we had so much stuff to do. I went down, I took care of that, came home. And then I never thought of asking, like, what package does she have? Turned out it was 10 megabytes per second or whatever, which was too slow for what I was doing. And the kind of stuff that I was, files and stuff that I was setting around. So I ended up having to upgrade it, but we went with another company and got this more of a Cadillac program package, and that's what we use now, and it works pretty well. And then, like you said earlier, we also bought these I think they're called UPS units, and they just you plug them in and they charge, and if you lose power, they've got a bunch of power saved up, and you can run your computers for at least a few hours until the power comes back up. So
when the power goes out, you mentioned, like, you get, like, I don't know if it's rolling brownouts or just random power outages. Like, how often does that happen, and how does that affect you?
It doesn't happen that often. I think it happened a little bit more when we first got here. I don't know if that was just, sort of a random thing, but I guess I'm not sure how, I guess in a place like Toronto, probably there's, your power comes from different areas. In a town like this, a lot of the power comes through on wires that are coming down the main road into town. There was a situation earlier in the year where they do a lot of controlled burns, and somebody did a controlled burn that quickly became uncontrolled, and it either caught fire, either a tree caught fire or a power pole caught fire, but a power line went down, and it was on the main road coming into town, and so the power was gone for most of the day. On that day, that was kind of a freak thing, but these things happen. And then we couldn't. It was funny because that's the main road coming into town, which is a pretty steep road, and the other road to come into town is there's a hill behind us called Cacique, which is a really steep hill. So all of a sudden, I kept hearing this noise all day long until I figured out what it was. It was the trucks coming into town delivering groceries and stuff like that to the grocery stores, were coming down this massive cliff because the main road was shut down, and it was power brakes. And these guys must have been terrified because they're driving like some of them were like 18-wheelers down the steepest hill you've ever seen. But It was their only option to get all their stuff into town. And you could hear the power brakes all day long, these guys going down this massive cliff. And so that happened one day. We've been here for almost 2 years, but it's not like Toronto where you can those 500 different ways you can get into one location.
Right. Of course. Yeah. So the phone service then, how does that the cell service or mobile service or whatever, how does that work for you?
Basically, what everybody does is you show up here if you're going to be here for any length of time, you go over to the computer store and buy a SIM card for about $3. Put that in your phone, and it comes with a phone number, and then you just pay as you go. You can go over to the corner store, pick up your beer and your bread and whatever, and then after you've paid for that, tell them that you want to top up your card. They ask you for your phone number. You give it to them. They ask you how much you want to put on the card. Want to put down $20 or whatever. Pay for that, and then boom, you get a text on your phone saying that you've got all that data, and you walk out. And that's what people do here. And then on top of that too, a lot of people, WhatsApp is very popular here. A lot of people everybody uses WhatsApp as well to communicate. And then even stuff like, I don't know, it's just, I guess it's just people are actually pretty creative with all kinds of different ways to take care of things. If you want to, we've got some restaurants in town during the pandemic where we couldn't go out and eat there, or they had minimal capacity, but we wanted to continue to support those restaurants. So we would order food from them once in a while and have it delivered. And, some of the restaurants in town have a Facebook page you go on and you can shop on the Facebook page, and then they deliver it to your place, right? I don't know if that's something people do in Toronto. I don't think so. I think, they got
the DoorDash and all that sort of stuff, Uber Eats, but we don't have that here in the county. In Prince Edward County, we don't have that. So you are once again one-upping us with your lifestyle out there.
Well, it's funny, right? And then the other thing that happened here where there wasn't a lot of food delivery, but when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden people wanted food, and now you see there's people who are ripping around on motorcycles with cooler bags on the back of their bikes. So that's a whole new business that came from the pandemic that didn't exist before. Yeah. It's interesting.
So the internet, the phone, and electricity, like the costs of these things, are they parallel? Are they cheaper? Is some things more expensive? What do we expect?
So the internet is a bit cheaper than back home. Obviously, just pay as you go on your phone is pretty cheap. I guess there's some people that go out and get a full package here. I think everybody I know goes pay as you go. That's all very affordable. The one thing that is very much like home is it's gotten to a point where going to the grocery store and shopping the prices are similar to back home. Going to a restaurant is a lot cheaper than eating at a restaurant back home. Price of alcohol, for instance, is a lot cheaper here than back home in the restaurants. And then as well, too, a lot of restaurants have happy hours. Some of them last 6 hours, 7 hours, So
6 hour happy hour.
It's people are very happy. But like that kind of thing, right? But that's got to do with, restrictive laws and stuff back home where alcohol and sin taxes, right? They don't tax that stuff as much here. So going out to a restaurant, if you're going to have a few glasses of wine or a few beers or whatever, you're not going to run up a huge bill for alcohol. It's going to cost you less. The food is less. Like we went out with some friends, to a really nice high-end seafood restaurant about a week and a half ago. And everybody had 3 or 4 drinks during the evening and, and appetizers and seafood and stuff. And, I think we paid about $80 for Belinda and I for that dinner. That dinner in Toronto.
That's incredible.
That dinner in Toronto was a $300 dinner.
Wow.
But having said that, the grocery stores, when you go to the grocery stores and you look at the prices there, you'll notice that they're more similar to North American prices.
Yeah, actually, we were looking at a couple like the Auto Mercado, I think, in town, and we're looking at they had some prices listed on their site.
Yeah,
and we were noticing like stuff like cheese. Like we're big cheese eaters, we love cheese.
Yeah,
and we're looking whether it's on par or a little bit more. And I'm just wondering, like, what is it that there's some things you're going to have to think about, rethink if you eat this particular thing a lot. It's a little bit more expensive here, or if you like this type of food, you're in luck because it's a heck of a lot cheaper here. I imagine seafood is a lot cheaper.
Well, not even. I'll start with the cheese. That's a good one. Cheese.
Okay.
So the locals here aren't big cheese eaters, or not, big eaters of a variety of cheese. Cheese is expensive here because it gets imported for gringos, for North Americans. So it's expensive. Cheese is very expensive here. Seafood can be cheap depending on where you get it. Like you can walk down to the waterfront and talk to the fishermen and ask them if they have any fish and buy it from them for cheap. If you go to the stores to buy fish, it can be not necessarily cheap because those stores also sell to the resorts, let's say.
Okay. Yeah.
So you can't necessarily go into a fish store and get it for really cheap, but then you can go to certain places if you know your way around. This is the thing down here is that you have to figure out the lay of the land and figure out who does what and who sells what and how to get things cheaper. And then there's also a lot of expats who come up with services here as well, or locals who have special services who sell fish out of their homes. Or we know a guy from Peterborough who's got a big business down here now selling sausage, and he even sells
awesome.
he even sells like South African sausage. That's how Belinda was thrilled that he sells a sausage called boerewurst. That's a South African farmer sausage, and we bought some of that, and she was like, "This is just as good as it's even better than some of the stuff I've had in South Africa." So there's all kinds of people that provide special services. Like for a while, we had a guy who used to deliver vegetables every week, show up in a truck with stuff we had pre-ordered, and there are companies that drive through, or individuals that drive through town selling eggs out of the back of a van. Or there's some people we know who drive around the neighborhood on Tuesdays selling fresh fish that somebody in their family caught, and they've got a scale in the trunk, and they'll show up and yell out across your property that they've got squid and this, that, and the other thing, and you go over to the back of the car and they open up the trunk and they've got like coolers full of fish and squid and octopus or whatever, and you can pick what you want. So there's a lot more of that available.
That sounds very familiar to where we are too. Like we have, if you wanted garlic, back when we first moved here, there was like a piece of plywood every few kilometers on certain roads, and spray painted really crudely in green spray paint was the garlic man, 2 kilometers this way, an arrow's point. And you'd arrive at some farm and there's a guy who sold amazing garlic. And then the same thing with meat and so on. So for some of us, I guess it's just once you land, it's making the right connections with the right people for those services, and not just expecting to go to the store and get everything you need at a price that you think is going to be comparable, I guess, or cheaper, I guess. It's just really getting to know the lay of the land, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. That's the situation here too. There's just up on the main road, a couple blocks from here, when I go down to the beach, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I work out with a trainer down at the beach. There's a guy up at the corner who sells huge watermelons. And then down the road, there's a guy who sells out of the back of a bicycle with a cooler, who's got all these coconuts on ice, and they take a machete, chop the top off, put a straw in it, and give you coconut water to walk away with for 1,000 colones, which is like about $1.80. All along the main roads, you can pull over at different spots, and they're selling all kinds of different tropical or fruit and stuff, and depending on what season it is, or avocados. So you can either buy that stuff at the grocery store and pay more for it, or you can buy it from the farmer on the side of the road. There's a bunch of places in the area where there are guys that have stands who stand out on the side of the road all day long and sell fresh squeezed orange juice. So there's a lot of that.
So there's the pure life living there. I mean, getting stuff right off the stem almost, right?
Yeah. And it's amazing too, right? Because all that stuff tastes really different. Belinda didn't really like pineapple that much in Toronto until she ate it here, because the pineapple we've been eating in Toronto gets put on a truck way before it's ripe and spends, I don't know how much time on a truck, right? And then the stuff that you get here, the pineapple that you get here is really tender because they, not exactly sure how it works, but it didn't spend all kinds of time in a truck, and they didn't have to, I guess, harvest it earlier than it needed to be harvested, I think.
Right. No,
right?
That's definitely, it's probably was chopped off the stem earlier that day or a week before or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like the fruit, a lot of the fruit tastes better and stuff. But the diet here, the locals and stuff, they eat a lot of rice and beans. It's different than going to Mexico and stuff. It's not really spicy food. It's a lot of rice and beans and protein. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the restaurants serve that. And then a lot of the restaurants also serve whatever else. There's, there are probably half a dozen good Italian restaurants. There's Chinese restaurants. There's sports bars. There's, we've got friends that own a Mediterranean restaurant. They sell shawarmas and, all that kind of stuff. And Le Coq, it's called. There's every other kind of restaurant available around too, because it's not just a town that's caters to locals. Obviously, there's a big tourism industry here.
So for people who are, I got to age myself. I'm 52.
Yeah.
And by the time we get down there, we're talking about, retirement age and older, obviously. So what about healthcare? Like, that's a big concern. And you've told me some stories that blew my mind in a positive way about dental care, about the basic necessities of healthcare. Tell us a bit about that, for people who are thinking about coming down long term later in life. That's a big concern. Are you going to alleviate our fears, or what should we be concerned about?
Well, basically, in many ways, it's a lot like Canada. So we have, there's universal health care here, which you can take part in if you become a permanent resident, which we recently became sort of the first step of permanent residency. And
congrats on that, by the way.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
thanks. So we've got our first cards. I say we're not like permanent residents yet. It's sort of like you get into the program, and then you're sort of level 1 for 2 years, and then you renew that, and you get bumped up. But once you're in, right? You get all those advantages. So we take part in what's called CAHA, which is the universal health care here. And so we have access to that, and we pay a little bit every month for that. I think we pay basically about $80 a month US for Belinda and I to be covered, which is, cheap because we're not.
Sorry, 80 each, or 80, like 40 each?
40 each, right?
Wow.
And we're paying into that because we're not paying income tax, right? So we have to put money into the system, but it's only $80 US for a month for the coverage. But then beyond that, why I say it's like Canada as well is that, as it is in Canada now, there's also private healthcare if you want to partake in that, right? If you want to jump the queue, you can do that as well. So that's available. There's clinics all over town where you can go in and get private healthcare. But the difference is when you go and get private healthcare is that it's not as expensive because labor is cheaper here.
Right.
Right. So like, for instance, a lot of people will come down here and get their dental taken care of because maybe they don't have dental included in their employment in Canada. So you can go in, state-of-the-art clinic. There's a Coco Medical and Dental Clinic here in town. It's on a little dirt road, but it's a brand new building with state-of-the-art equipment and stuff. And you go up and sit in the lobby, and you can sit in massage chairs. And when you go into the office, they got the 60-inch screen TV next to the dental chair, and it's all top-notch. But
sounds better than home.
Yeah, but you can get your teeth cleaned for I think it's like $40 or $50. And back home, it's like over $200. But my dentist back home.
I can tell you how much it is because our son just got his teeth cleaned yesterday. Yeah. In Picton, in Prince Edward County. And I think, the receipt is here somewhere, but it came up to over $400.
Wow.
So we're talking 10 times less. You were saying? Go on.
It's 40. I think it's $40 or $50 to get your teeth cleaned at the dentist here. And then for instance, I got I had a filling that kept breaking over the years, and I kept getting it fixed. And the dentist kept saying, well, eventually we'll just take the tooth out and put in a crown or whatever. And I kept putting it off. And then I got down here and it broke again. And then I got it fixed and it broke again. And the dentist's like, just get a crown. And she's like, but you waited too long and you're going to need a root canal too. So I was like, all right, well, let's just get it done. And I went and they had a guy, an oral surgeon who comes in to the clinic once a week and does root canals. I got a root canal done for $300. I didn't feel a thing. $300. I think I got a root canal done years ago in Toronto, and it cost me probably about $1,500 or $1,600.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
$300 for the root canal, I think. And then I got a crown, and I think it was $400, whereas a crown back in Toronto probably would cost a couple grand, right? Yeah. So it was all insane. Under $1,000, and I think in Toronto it probably would have cost me at least $4,000.
Wow. So that is a huge plus for so many people that are thinking about doing this. I know it is for us. That's dental, but what if you need if you're I don't know if you can answer this, but if you're a diabetic or if you have some other lifelong condition that you need to have regular attention, is that something to be concerned about and perhaps isn't the right move for that kind of person?
Well, that's part of the reason we're in this area because, I'm 51. We're not in our 60s yet. We're not in our 70s, but at some point we will be. And we wanted to settle down somewhere where that setup is already there. So that was a big part of being here. So we have all kinds of clinics here that are part of, the local healthcare system, and then private for-profit clinics as well. But like I said, they're not super expensive because the cost of labor here is nowhere near as expensive as it is in Ontario or anywhere in North America. Plus, on top of it too, my dentist back home, he's a great dentist, love him. He's been great over the years. But when I go in and get my teeth cleaned or I get something done, he's at Yonge and Eglinton, and he pays Yonge and Eglinton lease,
right? Right.
So I'm paying mostly a lot of that is for his lease and his overhead because living in Toronto and in some of these areas, it's like Manhattan rent. right? For those people, the people that we know here who own the clinic, they got a state-of-the-art clinic, but like I said, it's on an unpaved road, so they don't have the same kind of overhead for the clinic that they built. So that's part of it.
And the quality of the service. I mean, it's one thing to be cheaper and to have good gear and so on, good equipment, but the quality of the care you're getting.
Yeah, it's similar to the quality care that we get back home.
So, I mean, we could go on about this and we have in the past. And I think the bottom line is, if that's a concern, it's not so much of a concern, because it sounds like it's almost on par, certainly for the quality of care, but the ease of access and the cost sounds like way better.
Yeah, I mean,
than expected.
Having said that, like you alluded to this earlier, I don't need to be on kidney dialysis. If down here and that's a thing, you better figure out whether or not you can get that done properly. We know I have a friend who has an autoimmune disease and he needs very specific care. He was living down here and he would go back and forth between, it's my friend Jerry who does the theme song for this podcast. He was splitting his time between Newfoundland and Costa Rica. And when it hit the fan and he had to figure out what he was going to do, stay here during the pandemic or go home, he didn't know whether or not he was going to be able to get, he looked into it and he wasn't going to be able to get the care that he got back home here. So he had to go back to Newfoundland and ride out the pandemic there because he knew he could get that treatment there. And what he was doing before was he was living here, and when he needed the treatment, he'd fly back home, get it, and then come back to Costa Rica. So, I mean, if you have specific healthcare needs like that, obviously you have to do your homework and figure out whether.
Do the homework.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely do the homework. Yeah. Okay. So I know you're from Ottawa and you speak French. What about bibits? You know what I'm saying when I say bibits?
Yeah, des bibit, yeah, bugs.
Des bibit, little bugs, insects, bugs, but not just bugs, snakes and other critters in Costa Rica. And I wonder about, for somebody like myself who's a little bit skittish about that sort of thing, what do we expect? And is it really something to be that concerned about, or is it just a really neat part of the natural part of living in Costa Rica?
Well, it's both.
It's not helping me, Dave. It's not helping me.
Here's the thing, though. I mean, we see wildlife everywhere here. It's amazing. I'll go out, I'm talking to my neighbors and I try to get out to the pool during my lunch hour, and I'll go out to the pool around noon and spend maybe, 45 minutes in the pool, and I'll Sorry, Dave, stop for a second. Yeah. Do you understand what you just said? People are listening right now back home. I stopped, for a lunch break and went into the pool and hung out for a bit. Shut up. All right, go on. Yeah. So I'm out with my neighbors and we're watching the iguanas climb the trees, and we're watching an oriole building a nest and talking about that. And we're watching a bunch of parrots land in a tree. So that you see that all day long, right? But yeah, there are insects and bugs and snakes. To be honest, I haven't seen a lot of that ourselves because we have a condo on the second floor, and snakes and tarantulas and scorpions don't generally climb stairs to get up to second floor places. So
I'm laughing, but that's actually a concern. So that's all right. That's good to know.
Well, and I don't know, we'll probably see more of that at our new place because we're going to be living in a more remote area. Like I said, where we live right now is a bit more of a burb. But I've seen snakes on the property, and I've seen animals around, and I see a lot of skunks and different animals at night. You can hear monkeys in the trees and all that kind of stuff. But there's less of that right where we are because it's a little bit more built up. But the next place we're going to live is a little bit more rustic. It's a nice house, but the neighborhood around it's a little bit more rustic. We will probably see more of that. I've never heard of anybody getting bit by a tarantula. I've heard of the odd person getting bit by a scorpion, but the scorpions here are not deadly. You're just not going to feel very good for a couple of days.
So, okay. All right. This leads into, it sounds like there's a lot more fear, and I'm speaking for myself here, a lot more fear than worth having.
Yeah. I mean, you probably got a lot of snakes around your place, don't you?
That's why we have 5 cats.
Yeah. Okay. There you go.
I'm not a fan of snakes. Yeah, exactly.
Well, you can get cats here too.
Okay, well, and I guarantee you, with my wife, the cat lady, we're going to have cats. There's no doubt about that. And that'll help. So you mentioned you first bought a condo and now you're moving to a house. And you and I have talked about this quite a bit. And I know you've talked about this with other people who with similar conversations, the difference between condo living and a house. And I guess, and then there's a third level, I guess it's gated community where you have a house in a gated community, the condo life and so on. To talk a bit about that.
Well, when we came down here, the plan was to get a house. That's what we thought we were going to do. And then we went and looked at a lot of places, and Roland Tipper, our real estate agent, showed us like everything that was in what we said that we wanted to spend. But some of the thoughts were, okay, well, to cut to the quick, we ended up buying a condo. Having said that, part of the decision was, okay, are you going to live here all the time? No. So when you walk away from a house, how much upkeep is there? How much do you have to worry about that house compared to condo that's where there's a lot more foot traffic and people around all the time that can keep an eye out for your place, right? And where there's a security guard who's there every single night. Like we have a security guard who's on our property every single night of the week. And all the other condos around here do too. Not because there's a lot of crime, but it makes people feel better. And it's fairly affordable to have a security guard work on your property when you share that cost with all of your neighbors. So if you have a house and you walk away from it and leave it for 6 months, you don't have security necessarily. Maybe you're going to worry about your place more. Maybe you're still going to have to hire somebody to come and check on, I don't know, to maintain your property and all that kind of stuff. So you don't come back and it's a jungle. That was something to think about.
Absolutely. Yeah. So HOA fees, then I guess that's what covers your security, your landscaping, whatever. Is it comparable to Toronto in HOA fees? I guess it depends where you move to, but how much of a concern, how much of an expense is it?
Well, here where we live, and we live in one of the nicer complexes in Las Palmas, we pay $175, I think, a month for HOAs. Having said that, there's a high-end gated community here called Pacifico that's more like a resort. The people who own condos there, they could pay upwards to $1,000 a month for their condo fees. Which is like how much you'd pay in downtown Toronto, or I didn't even pay that much at our place in downtown Toronto. We had a gym and pools and all kinds of stuff. But that's a massive property, right? And they have bars and multiple swimming pools, and they also have a beach club down on the ocean and all that stuff you're subsidizing. So, I mean, if you want that lifestyle, maybe $1,000 a month to cover all that is worth it for you. For us, we didn't want to live sort of in a place that felt more like a resort. We wanted to feel like we wanted our neighborhood to feel a bit more like a community than a travel destination. So we didn't want that. So we weren't going to pay that anyways.
So I know that when we first started talking and you introduced me to Roland, and there was a lot of properties that were listed and were sending us listings that were condos in Pacifico. And there's, to this day, I mean, that was a year ago. To this day, we're still seeing lots of listings at that location. Mm-hmm. But the I guess the downside, other than the obvious good, I mean, yeah, it's resort living or whatever. You got multiple pools, bars, as you said, multiple choices, the beach club and so on. But there's a downside to that lifestyle. Never mind the cost, the HOA fees. But what's the downside of living in a plex like that?
Well, a lot of people love it. A lot of people love it, and a lot of people would not live any other way. But that's not really how we wanted to live. I think the part of it is, from my experience, you're going to have less encounters with locals in a place like that. I think you're going to be more apt to be dealing with expats because it's very much a gated community, and you have to drive in, and you got to, if you're visiting, they got to check with people, and security's pretty tight, and it's just more restricted and restrictive.
It sounds like it's a bit more touristy as well, because there's a lot of rental properties in that complex, or similar type of complex. A lot of like weekly rental, monthly rental. So you get lots of tourists, as opposed to a community of people living together and sharing a space. Yeah,
but even our neighborhood here, I mean, a lot of the places around here are condos. They're not, the people who own them don't necessarily live there. They have a property management company that rents those places out all year round, and the North American family that owns it is back in Toronto, and that's part of their income from that. So it's not, that kind of lifestyle isn't necessarily exclusive to Pacifico, that place that we were talking about. It's just a different level. Like around here, it's just not as resorty, like there's condo complexes all over the place, but it's a bunch of like townhouses overlooking a shared pool. Whereas if you go up to Pacifico, it's more like if you went to a resort that you would stay at in,
or something.
Yeah. Going to Mexico or something like that. It's, it's a different feel.
So I guess sorry, go ahead.
Well, and people ask us about that all the time, and I don't poo-poo those places because for a lot of people, like that's their thing. And I appreciate that. It's just not really my thing. But, having said that, before we lived here, when I went away, a lot of my life, I stayed at resorts with, buffets and a la carte restaurants and stuff like that. And, You know, I've stayed at a lot of places like that too and enjoy them as well. So I just didn't want to live. I just didn't want to live in one.
And that's the thing. I think that what I'm hearing mostly is, and through this conversation and past conversations and the research, is it really comes down to landing. Well, not literally literally landing there, but landing yourself a good connection with a good real estate agent like Roland, who can understand what you're looking for and also give you the heads up. Because it was Roland, I think, as well as yourself, that gave us the heads up about the difference between different types of condoplexes and the answers you're giving me right now about the difference between a house, a gated community, and so on. And I think it's mostly just finding somebody who's going to listen, right? To like any real estate agent, somebody's going to listen to you and understand your lifestyle that you're looking for, and also give you the heads up and the caveats, like, well, you might want that, but here's what's going to come with it. And I guess it's most importantly to find the right real estate agent, right?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Here's something else. Was it you that told me the story? Did you tell me you had a friend who built a house up in the hills? Okay, it was you. So yeah. you can explain that, but what the pitfall was with what he did.
Yeah. So in our research, I like you, tons of research. There's several different people. We have a travel agent who owns property in Costa Rica. A friend of mine I used to work with at YTV, he owns property there. And he's the guy who years ago, I think over 10 years ago, a dozen years ago, he went down and just fell in love right away and didn't do his homework, didn't do all the research he should have done. At the time, properties were like $10 versus $1. He bought a nice hilltop or mountaintop property with a very steep graded drive to get there. And for the first few years he was there, it was great living there. And it was remote. It had this great view, jungle on one side, ocean in the distance on the other. By all accounts, just beautiful and perfect. What he didn't plan on and what he should have thought about was during the rainy season, over time, the erosion of that drive that was built, that driveway, that steep driveway. He's now at the stage where he has this property he can no longer access. It would cost him way more than he can afford to get that drive regraded at an angle or whatever. The engineering would just cost too much to get. So he's got a property he can't access other than by foot. And he really wishes he'd done a lot more homework. So his advice to me was, do your homework in so many different ways. And I think, I appreciate the conversations we've had, you and I, but also appreciate the conversations that we're having. And I think anybody listening is don't just listen to one person, is having multiple points of view and hearing these different anecdotes and learning from other people's mistakes as well. It sounds like you did a lot of research, and it doesn't sound like you've made too many mistakes because you did your due diligence. But I think the biggest mistake people can make by the sound of it is just jumping in too fast, being too excited and seeing something on the surface that just sounds too good to be true. And then sure enough, it is, right? And I think that was the big lesson learned through my friend who had that property.
Yeah, well, not only just like that situation where somebody builds a house and finds out after that the road into their property gets washed out. There are towns down here where the one road into the town can get washed out at times of the year. So never mind just a one house. There's a variety.
The whole community.
A whole community can have issues getting in. Like, so when you come down here, you see people driving around, and a lot of people own 4x4s, and they oftentimes they'll put snorkels. You know what I mean by snorkel on the exhaust, right? You don't see that in North America at all, but it's an adapter that you go down to the shop, and instead of having your muffler come out at sort of wheel level in the back, they pipe that into a plastic snorkel that comes up the side of the car, so the exhaust comes up out of the top of your car rather than the back, right? So that you could drive through a washed out road and not have your car stall. And back home, if somebody put that on your car, you'd laugh and say, what a tool. You don't need that. But down here, I mean, you need that at certain times of the year, right? Depending on what kind of community you live in. If the road gets washed out, that's a reality too. That's not something that happens where we are. I mean, we had a lot of rain last summer, and the main road near our place got a lot of rain. It was kind of gone the next morning, but nobody got stranded from their home for a couple of days because the road was washed out.
Good to know. So speaking of driving, the driving through the country, I mean, it is a small country, but when you plug in a destination. You're like, your starting point, your destination on Google Maps. And what looks like it would be like a half hour or hour long drive back here on a regularly paved highway is like, 5 times the length of time there. So what is it about the driving there that we should be aware of?
Well, the good news is a lot of the big highways now have been paved and they're nice and smooth and there's some beautiful highways. What they don't do here, though, like they do, Highway 7, it's not like back home where, whatever 80 years ago, they blasted, dynamited through the Canadian Shield to put a straight highway from Ottawa to Toronto kind of thing, or Ottawa to Peterborough, Highway 7, something like that. They don't do that because obviously the cost of that is just, massive. So the roads are built around the topography, right? So they're windy and makes for beautiful driving. And if you want to buy a motorcycle, it makes for nice riding, but it's not as direct as, there's no 401 here. Right. But there are some really nice highways, having said that.
And so you cycle, you belong to, or you belonged. Do you still have a motorcycle there? Are you still riding when you're down there?
I don't have a bike back home. I sold it before we moved down here at a Harley, and I didn't think it would be great to bring it down here. Plus, if you bring a vehicle from home, there's a big they put a big tariff on it for bringing it down. So it would have been very expensive to bring my Harley down here, and this isn't really Harley country anyways. If you're going to come down here, you should get yourself an on-off road bike, or
Right. So and that's the thing. The car that you got, you did eventually get a car. Initially, you didn't have a car.
Yeah, for a whole year, we rode bicycles, and we did our grocery shopping on bicycles with baskets and everything. But Sorry, go ahead. Well, what happened was interesting. Belinda had a health scare one day. She walked into the room one morning and told her I'd been down at the pool, and I was talking to the guy who works at the pool. His name's Jonathan, and I mentioned his name, and she didn't know who he was, and then she was really out of it, and I started asking her questions, and I thought she might be having a stroke. So I started getting her to do all kinds of exercises, like motor skill exercises, to see whether or not she was having a stroke, touch her nose, that kind of stuff, do the alphabet, a bunch of different things I'd learned from somebody else who told me about how to deal with somebody who might be having a stroke. Quickly figured out she wasn't having a stroke. There was something wrong with her, and I ended up getting in touch with one of our neighbors who had a car, and we zipped over to the hospital in Liberia, which is an hour away, and got sorted out and whatever. And she was having side effects from medication she was taking some tablets for migraines. But when that happened, I thought we should get a car, because if there was nobody around that day or whatever, there is an ambulance in town. You can call up the ambulance and stuff. But I just decided, we need a car. So we ended up going out and buying a car. And I didn't want to spend a ton of money because we're not down here all year. So I bought like a really old, but it's in good condition, a 4x4, and for like $4,000 US. It's a 1992 Daihatsu Rocky 4x4. And it's pretty cool looking, actually, and it's fun to drive. And it's manual. And so now we have a vehicle, so we drive more than we cycle these days for sure. But we still walk around a lot and stuff because you come down here and you don't want to be in the car all the time. You want to also get some exercise and stuff.
So that also plays into where you decide to purchase a home, obviously, because we were talking about this. There's some beautiful properties up in the hills, but you're dealing with, like I mentioned earlier, my friend who had that steep drive that got washed out. You're far away. It's not like you can just step out and go down the road and like you would, like say in Toronto, if you lived in the annex and you walk down to college or whatever and go to a bar or a restaurant. That's what you have in Place del Coco. So you got to consider the locale in that regard if you are that type of person who likes to walk around. I guess that's something that you're going to find out pretty quickly when you're doing your reconnaissance mission, right? Because you're not just going down. People shouldn't go down or sight unseen buy a place and then show up and then find out these, I should have thought about this. I should have thought about that.
Well, right? Yet again, people do buy properties down here sight unseen, especially during the pandemic. Roland and real estate agents here have been selling a lot of homes based on video tours on iPhones and stuff like that. I think a lot of people have been looking for properties because of the pandemic and because of this idea of being digital nomads and stuff like that, and are worried about missing out on properties or the prices rising or whatever. So we know people who have bought properties sight unseen. I guess you hope that you're going to work with a real estate agent, though, who's going to give you all the details, For instance, the house is beautiful, but, you should be asking the questions like, what is the road going to the house? How far away is it? If I go out to if you're a person who likes going out and having drinks and going to the bar, and obviously you don't want to be drinking and driving and stuff, is it walkable, or am I going to have to take a cab home? Or those are some of the options, or some of the things that you might want to think about. Well, like I said, there's that big cliff, right? There's a bunch of people who own properties on the top of Cacique Hill. And that's a piece of property where you can get some of the most stellar views of the ocean. But, you're not going to be walking up and down that hill going to restaurants because it's just too steep. It's like, it's a workout. People here in the neighborhood do that hill as a major workout, walking up that hill. It's so steep. So you're not going to walk down that hill to go to the restaurant and then walk up it. You're gonna be driving, and which
is something to consider, definitely.
And there's a pretty good chance if you live at the top of the hill, you can see the restaurant you're going to go to, but it's still too steep to walk it. Like we live in a valley down by not a valley, but down where we are. In either direction to get out of town, it's a drive up a steep hill.
You're in a bowl, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of different things to think about like that. And I guess if you're going to buy sight unseen, you're going to hope that you're dealing with a real estate agent who's going to think about all those things and explain them, because you can't necessarily feel them out yourself as if you landed here and went and checked everything out on your own.
One thing that I thought was unique, and it's not just in Playa del Coco, but a lot of communities, especially the beach communities, is having a golf cart to get around as opposed to a car.
Yeah, you can do that here. Yeah, that's popular.
And what are the restrictions, or what are the laws on that as far as licensing? Like, if you have a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old, can they drive a golf cart around town, or is it the same as here? Like, you have to have a license, or what's the deal there?
Well, I don't know what the rule is for you. First of all, let's say if you have a golf cart, you need a license, and it needs a license plate, and it needs insurance, and it's treated like a vehicle. I see kids driving them around, but I mean, there's a police station on the main street. Let's put it this way. There's a police station on the main street, and those cops are looking out. They take care of major issues. They're not dealing with, well, you've lived in a lot of places that are developing countries and visited a lot of places.
Right.
You'll be driving along, and there'll be a motorcycle that'll ride by you, and there will be, a husband, the wife, and a toddler sitting on the tank, and nobody's got a helmet on.
Right.
There's probably, I don't know if there are helmet laws, but that's not the thing that the police just don't worry themselves about that. They worry about the big things. They worry about a murder. They'll go check out your place if you got broken into, there's robberies or whatever, all that kind of stuff. They're not walking around giving out fines for people who are with open containers of alcohol. They're not, you know what I mean? All that kind of stuff is just not an issue. So yeah, I see 14-year-olds driving down the street in golf carts. It's probably not legal, but it happens all the time.
Sure. Are those 14-year-olds also able to, it's a crazy question, but are they also able to buy a beer if they were so inclined?
I don't see a lot of really young kids drinking alcohol, but to be honest, I don't really know. I think the big difference is like the big difference between like North America and Europe, where like European kids grow up being able to drink wine and stuff like that. I don't think there's a real big niet like there is back in like when we were growing up, that like going out and drinking a lot was rebellious. Right. Like it's the culture here is different, where I don't think kids are like, yeah, my parents aren't around, we're going to go over and, buy liquor and get blasted like North American kids used to do. Cause it's not really, like it's just more open. So
it's not taboo. It's not rebellious enough because it's not taboo.
Yeah. Like I see young people drinking, but I don't see young people, down at the beach, like super wasted or anything like that. It's just, you don't see that as much. But I think even back in North America, it's a little bit different. I think it was different in the 80s and 90s and stuff like that, where it was more of a rebellious thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned the police, you mentioned like more serious crimes that they're concerned with. Got to touch upon it.
Mm-hmm.
Crime. You hear extremes, you hear on both ends. Oh, it's completely safe. It's wonderful. It's great. Never seen anything bad. And then you hear horror stories about, it depends, I guess, on where in Costa Rica people are talking about, but specifically where you've been, where you are, and where you've been. Well, what's crime like from your point of view?
Well, there's crime here. Most of it is petty theft, and break-ins, crimes of opportunity. People who aren't around, condos that aren't being rented out and maybe aren't well lit enough. That kind of thing. There's that kind of thing. There's, people just, somebody somebody on one of the Facebook pages had said that they had been robbed. They went down to the beach and they went in the ocean and left their cell phones and some stuff on their towels, and they didn't get robbed. Somebody stole their stuff because they were stupid enough.
That's just stupidity.
To just leave it on their towel and not hide it, or bury it in some sand in a bag under, I don't know, or put it in a waterproof bag that they kept on around their waist.
Just common sense. To common sense.
Yeah, exactly. What are some of the other crimes I've heard around here? Last year, there was a guy murdered here in town because he went to a drug house and got somebody tried to rob his phone, and he put up a fight and he got stabbed. But he was trying to buy crack at a drug house, which is probably not a good idea anywhere. I wouldn't do that in Toronto. Wouldn't do it here.
Yeah.
There's crime here, but it's you
got to look for it. You have to be in the wrong place at the right time.
Or that has to be part of your lifestyle.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because
so
there's
really,
no shortage of, I hear people coming down here and, you hear stories about, oh, this guy or that guy's got a pretty good cocaine problem. And it's like, well, why is that? Well, because we live kind of along the cocaine highway between all these different countries where, cocaine is produced and moved around. So that, I've never been a consumer of cocaine, but it's very pure here. It's very, like the cocaine here apparently is really good. And it's cheap. And it's cheap.
Good. Noted.
Yeah. And it's cheap because we're near all the countries that produce it. So, maybe if you come down here and you've got a big cocaine problem, maybe this isn't, and you're trying to rid yourself of that problem. And some countries might not be the best places for you to land.
Yeah. Just to be clear, I was kidding about noting that. I have no intention of. Well, actually, okay. Having said that, we're in a country, back at home in Canada. We're in a country where marijuana is legal, and we can go down to Picton, and there's a few places that we can choose to buy our THC products from.
Yep.
And we can freely smoke or eat them at our pleasure. For people who are, appreciate that lifestyle. Mm-hmm. What is the warning, or what is the situation for somebody who's thinking about, I want to have my edibles. It helps, maybe it's medicinal reasons or whatever. What's the word to them?
Well, that a bunch of people have asked me about that because, like you said, it's legal back home. So people are like, okay, well, that's part of their lifestyle. They're not going to, if they're going to spend half the year down here, they want to be able to partake here as well. And the answer to that is, like I said earlier, people seem to be able to buy a lot of different products pretty freely here from a lot of different sources. That it's, I don't see people walking around smoking joints on the street, that kind of thing, walking around like you can back home more so these days. Probably not a good idea here. It is illegal. Like I said, once again, though, the police have got a bigger fish to fry. I don't think they're really going around looking for that sort of thing unless you put it in their face. My other experience too is that we've met a lot of people who have come down here for a more relaxed lifestyle. I've known a lot of former military people, a lot of former police, people with PTSD.
Okay, PTSD, right.
PTSD who are looking and need cannabis to help them out. So they come down here, and everybody I know who's in that boat has been able to replenish their supply pretty easily. And then even at that, we know people who have issues with PTSD who have, who spend part of their time back in the US, specifically in Canada, who have prescriptions and letters from doctors and are able to fly things, products from back home in as well, right? It's totally different than it was when, 20 years ago.
Absolutely. See, and every time, even though it's legal, I still get this, here obviously, but I still get this image of Midnight Express if you get caught, being stuck in a Turkish prison. That's my biggest fear. I'll freely admit I partake in edibles on a semi-regular basis. And I won't need to continue if it's going to be a Midnight Express type of situation. But, by the sounds of it, if you really are in need, you either have that legal way of bringing it over through travel, or if you know the right connections, you can get it, but you just got to be smart about it, right?
Yeah, that seems to be how it's done here. I'm sure there are still opportunities for a Midnight Express sort of situation. If you're trafficking, that's never going to work out well for you.
Yeah, fair enough. And that's just freaking common sense. right? I mean, like, anybody who's thinking anything bigger than that is you're not being smart about it at all. So if you talk about like the biggest thing you miss, obviously you mentioned off the hop, you're missing family, you're missing friends because of the situation. You didn't plan on being there that long. You're doing the 6 and 6, the 6 months Toronto, 6 months there. So obviously you're missing family and friends, but on a regular basis, or sorry, a regular situation outside the pandemic, what is it you miss the most?
Well, the thing is, I do miss living in a big city, and I this place, psychologically, this is what happened. So we came down here in October of 2019, planning to be here until May, and everything went sideways. And now it's over a year and a half later. By the time, if I didn't get back there this summer, by the time, October rolls around, that's 2 years we've been here. And psychologically, I'd planned to be here for 6 months and then go home and then have a taste of what I was used to. I've never lived in a small town ever. The smallest town I've ever lived is like living in a burb in Ottawa. So like, a city of about 1 million people, Ottawa
right.
area, right? That's the smallest place I've ever lived. I've never lived in a small community where everybody knows each other and you kind of got to watch what you do because it's a small town and people gossip and all that kind of stuff, which is a bit a part of the, how things work here. It's a small town and everybody knows each other.
Right.
So I've never lived in a small town. So, it's been different after a year and a half for me. It's kind of like I'm not used to living in a place that's small and where it's kind of this slow. It's been great. I can't really complain about it, but it's not something I'm used to. And I thought I was going to be back in Toronto. So part of it psychologically is I miss the big city. Having said that, I know that if I had gone back or if I was able to get back any time in the past year, I always say the Toronto that I know does not really exist right now. All of the things I enjoy about Toronto right now, like most of them are not available to you. Even if I go back, I've been working out regularly with a trainer here. If I went back to Toronto for the summer, I don't think the gyms are going to be open anytime soon. Nope. All that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
The things that we used to do when we lived at the marina, going down to, the Amsterdam brewery was one of our locals, all those kind of things that we take for granted about getting out. And all those things are right now, they're all, as far as I know, still shut down and everything. So I wouldn't have been able to enjoy any of that anyways, but psychologically, I didn't prepare to be down here for this long. I think eventually we'll live down here for longer stretches, but I still love the city. Like I still love living in the city. I'm still a city guy. I like the idea of having a chill winter, warm winter, and being here and living sort of in the small town, and then going back in the hustle and bustle of the city in the summer, and going out and auditioning for movies. Like that's the one thing I miss here. Back home because of the lifestyle I had set up. I was regularly going out and auditioning for stuff. That's the amazing thing about working in our industry. Like I can get a call from my agent and tell me that that I've got an audition to work on the new Star Trek series or to work in a new Marvel movie. Like that stuff actually happens, and it's exciting.
Yeah.
So right now that's not happening. That's the thing. Like I'm looking forward to having really chill winters and all the fun of high season. And then, having people come to visit here too, during the winters and stuff like that, having friends and family come down or rent a condo for a week and being able to hang out with them and take them out to restaurants and bars and fishing and scuba diving and stuff like that, doing all that exciting stuff and still all the time working. And in the summer, going back to Toronto and living our life there and being able to go out and audition for these cool projects. And you never know what's going to come up. I miss that about living in Toronto, is working in our industry and all those exciting opportunities that still come along.
And there is a budding, and this is my own research. So there's a budding film community and industry in Costa Rica. Of course, no comparison to Toronto. Mm-hmm. But have you ever thought of exploring that? I know we talked about that, and your focus is with your agent and with your work back home. But have you ever thought of exploring that?
Yeah, I think I would at some point. I'll look into it. I haven't yet because just for the past year and a half, we've been so busy with the work we already have and then everything else that we've done, figuring out the lay of the land. Now, settling into a place, furnishing our condo, and now, selling our condo, buying another place, getting our residency, getting driver's licenses, getting access to healthcare, like all those things that you do when you move to a new country. Like you got to figure out that, exploring other opportunities with work when I already have enough work right now. It hasn't been something I've done so far, but I would for sure, because it would be cool every once in a while to work on some small film here or whatever. I'd be up for that. I just haven't looked into it too much so far because I haven't needed to do that to pay the bills, you know?
Yeah, no, fair enough. But even just to have your acting chops, to keep them up. I mean, there's a university, Veritas University, which has apparently like the #1 film and TV program in Costa Rica. It's in San Jose, which is how many hours is San Jose from you?
It's about
5 hours.
5 hours, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and they have student productions and probably, I'm going to say probably, most likely predominantly in Spanish, but you never know. I mean, it's something to explore. I mean, just, for somebody like you, if you're in a situation where, I can't get home, but man, I'd love to do something like this. Maybe it's worth exploring that.
Yeah, maybe I could be in a Spanish language soap opera.
The new Eric Estrada.
Yeah. There's a lot of those that they love they love those in Latin America. They love those soap operas.
Oh God, yeah. You could do that. You could be the gringo who plays the bad guy or something. I don't know why you'd be the bad guy, but anyways, yeah. So overall, what would you say is the #1 best thing about where you are and what the life you're living?
I think the big thing is the lifestyle here isn't as stressful as living in North America. I will say though that is the time that I've spent here has been not necessarily the best time in human history to be able to make a statement about that, because it's still been stressful because of pandemic and all that kind of stuff. And, even like, people come down here these days, people are still coming in and renting places, and people are still traveling and staying here. And they're like, they'll tell you what their thoughts on the place are. And they kind of figure like, oh, they know what Coco's like. And I'm like, yeah, but this isn't what it's like. It's usually a lot more lively, and, things are still pretty quiet here. And there's a lot of restrictions about what you can do, and, capacity in restaurants and stuff like that. This is not what it's usually like. And then,
right.
It's been a stressful year. So, but I think in normal times, or, in sort of, what we know as normal times, the lifestyle here is definitely less stressful. People move slower. People aren't in panic about a lot of things. And I think that's the big thing, is it's a more chill lifestyle. That's
more chill lifestyle.
And that's probably the #1 thing. And, at the end of the day too, literally at the end of the day, if you are living here and working, and you turn off your phone and close your laptop, that you don't have to deal with your clients and whatnot and your colleagues anymore, and you can walk 10 minutes and grab your beach chair and throw a couple of beers in a bag and walk down and watch the sun go down, and it's a 10-minute walk to the beach. That's pretty cool. It's not like, it's not like back home where going to the beach for is a big thing, right? Where you got to plan it days in advance and take off in the morning and spend the whole day and all that kind of stuff. When the Pacific Ocean is 300 meters from here, and I can hear all day long. I can hear the ocean beating against the shore from our condo.
Really? That's because I think about, where we are in Prince Edward County, and we're lucky. We're very close to the Sandbanks and North Beach and all that. There's different beaches around here. Clearly not the same thing, but that beach lifestyle does exist in certain times of the year, like from now until September. But it's nowhere like what you're talking about, of course. So we're lucky, but I think that's something that I think is probably the biggest attractor, is the idea of being close to the Pacific Ocean, palm trees, warm breeze, and just that nice, lazy lifestyle, which I know is not, predominant all the time, but it's certainly the biggest attractor, I think, eh?
Yeah, and if you came down here for sure, you guys come down here once you get settled in. Some of that stuff you're going to take for granted. That's just human nature, but it's still all there, right? Every once in a while we remind ourselves that, hey, the Pacific Ocean is just a couple blocks from here. Let's grab our chairs and go down with some friends and sit on the beach for an hour at the end of the day, and then come home and maybe get back to work or resume other stuff. Or
yeah, that's absolutely. So I mean, like, we could go on and on about the minutia of buying versus renting, or trying to find a mortgage, the lawyers that you need to get in touch with, and all that. Those are the kind of questions I think are best answered by somebody like Roland, who would connect you with those kind of people that you need to talk to as well, right?
Yeah, and there's also, a lot of resources online for stuff like that. I would suggest, I've got a friend named Yves Mallet. His nickname is Pepito. He's got a YouTube channel. I think I've sent you links to his show before. He's got a show called Pepito Live. That's on YouTube, and he's really good. He's often got guests on, like he'll have real estate people on, he'll have immigration lawyers on, he'll have people from all kinds of different walks of life who have information about buying, selling, about living here, the nuts and bolts of how to do it. He's a good place to go to meet and hear those people talk about how to get all that stuff done. Yeah, there's, I got another friend down here who was on my podcast named Malcolm Hill. He does a podcast that's called Move to Costa Rica podcast. He himself was, like I said, a guest on my podcast. He and his wife, they're quite young. They're in their 20s. They moved down here after getting married. They run their own surf school. He's Australian. The Papadopoulos Surf, Papadopoulos Surf, I think it's called. And so he's got a podcast where he interviews all kinds of people who moved down here who talk about their own experiences and that kind of thing. I mean, there's lots of resources on social media and stuff that you can look up to find out how all this stuff happens. But yeah, a lot of it's just, coming down here and talking to people and finding out, just like a lot of little things like, oh, my air conditioner broke down. Who should I call about that? And who does this and who does that? And who's a good locksmith and all that kind of stuff, because it's less about like how it is back home. It's not, people don't pull out the yellow pages anymore, but it's less about looking it up on the internet. And it's more about going to social or Facebook pages, local Facebook pages, and asking people, right, how do you do this? How do you do that? Call this guy, call that person, call that lady. I need, I have a rooftop patio and we want to get cushions made for the seats up there. And, people on the local Facebook pages will tell you, here's, call this seamstress, call that company, call these people. And I mean, that's what you end up doing a lot of, is just talking to people and finding out who provides all the services in the area.
So if you were to sum up, like, the things you wish you knew at the stage, like where Lisa and I are at, or other people who are doing the research and so on, what is the one thing that you wish you could go back in time and tell yourself?
I can't really think of many things because not tooting my own horn or whatever, but we really did a lot of research.
Yeah.
So I haven't been surprised by a lot of things. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. One thing that people did say to me a lot and we ignored was people on YouTube pages and stuff like that, and books I've read, people said, don't come down here and buy a place right away. Come down here and rent. And right. I just didn't want to be renting a place. And so we ignored that and we came down and bought a place. It's been a great place. We recently sold it and decided to do something else, but I don't feel like, I don't regret having bought this place. So I don't really have any misgivings about anything we've done, so far. I hear other people who do have misgivings about things they've done or even coming down here at all and have gone home. But I think that always comes down to people making rash decisions and not doing any research. And anything I do, anytime I bought a motorcycle, a car, a skateboard, I still ride longboard skateboards. I research the hell out of everything. And so I'm often not disappointed with those purchases, because the boat, like I said, all that stuff Jim and I did looking at boats and stuff, all the research that we did before we bought our boat. By the time we got our boat, we were thrilled with what we'd gotten for what we had paid for it, because we really, really did a lot of research.
And you've had Jim to help you kick the tires, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then you come down here too, and that's the thing too, right? I mean, all the things that you need to get done. And I think a lot of the people I know who have already come down here and purchased places and who will in the future, I think a lot of those people haven't really gotten blindsided by a lot of things because they did their research, and they also asked me a lot of questions and Belinda a lot of questions, and we kind of gave them the heads up. And, I guess we've made some little mistakes here and there, no big mistakes, but I mean, it's also good to talk to other people to find out, what not to do. But, yeah, and luckily for us, there's been no big thing where it's like, oh wow, we really screwed that one up, missed. Yeah, we really pooched that thing. Right. So I think, Yeah, all the people I know who have come down to purchase here, most of those people did a lot of research beforehand and don't seem to be disappointed with what they did so far.
That's, I mean, when I speak for just myself and Lisa, that's us. That's us. We're in the same boat. Like we overdo the research. I say overdo, maybe not overdo. Well, we were talking about this the last time we spoke.
Mm-hmm.
I was getting to the point where I'm looking at pictures. I'm looking at the map of Coco, and I'm looking at the different restaurants, and then I'm popping up the pictures, and I'm seeing like the owners and the staff and so on, to the point where once we get down there, I'm going to be able to walk up to them and say, "Hey, how are you?" Like, I know you. And It sounds like you do the same thing, right?
Yeah. Well, there was people who live in our neighborhood. I saw them in YouTube videos and stuff. I knew who they were. And, I came down here and you meet somebody and you feel like telling them that you already know who they are, but you just felt it sounds creepy, but but there's a lot of that for sure. Especially if you're checking out all the YouTube videos where people are going around interviewing people in the neighborhood, and then you come down and you're like, you know who all those people are, and then you get here and then you see them around, and it's kind of like we're seeing celebrities because you're like, oh, there's that, it's bizarre.
But you're that guy. Now you're that guy, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
People are going to hear your voice or see your picture or whatever, right? So we talk about the stuff that you miss about home, but when you leave Coco, I mean, obviously, right now you're jonesing to get home, see friends and family, get back into the industry groove for a little bit. But what are you going to miss about there when you're away from there?
Well, I was thinking about this the other day, and here's one of the things. If I go back this summer, and I don't know if I'm going to do this because I think it might be a little bit of a while before I can get back, and I don't know whether if I go back, there's enough time and it's worth it to put the boat back in the water for a little bit. But if I do, okay, so the marina's in downtown Toronto. It's right at the foot of Spadina. Mm-hmm. My boat is sitting in the water, but I can't jump off the dock at the marina and swim in Lake Ontario. You know what I mean? Like,
I know what you mean.
Yeah, I can swim in the pool here. I can go down to the ocean and swim in the ocean. But most people who live in Toronto, if you go to the beach and the beaches or whatever, or Sunnyside or whatever, there's not a lot of people who go in Lake Ontario and swim.
Not that end of Lake Ontario, no.
Yeah. You do have some more so outdoor where you are up and around.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And that kind of thing, and sandbanks and stuff. But that's something. Like, I'm used to just jumping in the water all the time. You can't do that living downtown Toronto without going to a public swimming pool. But aside from that, what will I miss from here? Well, one of the things that's interesting, and like I said, I haven't lived in a small town before, but when I walk down the street, people drive by and honk and wave, and kids high five me, and they're just people I know, because we just know everybody around here because it's a small town.
Yeah.
You also have to be more careful about your relationships in a small town. For all those people who are listening who grew up in small towns in rural areas in Ontario or wherever in Canada or the US, they know what that's all about. That's not something I ever worried about living in downtown Toronto. Living in the last condo I lived in, I knew one or two neighbors. Aside from that, there were hundreds of people who lived in my condo. I maybe knew three of them, And when you go out in the town in Toronto, you could, like, when you're working at CBC, you ran into somebody you knew who worked at the CBC, you'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe I ran into you.
Yeah.
You seldom, there's that anonymity in a big city like Toronto.
Exactly. The anonymity.
It just is not. It doesn't exist here. So it's got its pluses and minuses,
Yeah, they say here in the county that if you don't know what you're doing, somebody does.
Yeah.
It is a different, I mean, we're used to that aspect here. I mean, you walk into a bar or restaurant back when we first, we're going out a lot more. Mm-hmm. We'd walk in and like, hey, it's the Papadopoulos. Everybody knew everybody. It wasn't that we were special. Everybody knew everybody. Yeah. And so that aspect of living in Coco sounds very similar. And that's something that's very attractive to people like us who like that aspect of community living where everybody knows everybody, kind of like that Cheers atmosphere.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, but at the same time, what I'm hearing is that you're missing a bit of that anonymity and the ability to meet new people on a daily basis back home. Right. Like we're going to the Amsterdam, we're going wherever, meeting tourists, meeting people from away.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be interested in seeing what it's like when I get home.
Yeah.
And I'm in many ways, I think I'm a different person than I was when I left Toronto because of the lifestyle here, right? I mean, I'm probably going to be back home. And first of all, I'm probably going to every once in a while say something to people who walk by in Spanish, because I know I do that in French sometimes. Like sometimes when I go and I work at TFO and I'm speaking French all day, I'll get on the subway and I'm going home and I go to bump into somebody and I say, excuse me, in French, right?
Right.
Like there's probably going to be situations where I'm going to be walking around Toronto. I'm going to, greet people in Spanish or whatever, because you're just so used to talking to people in Spanish all day long, or stuff like that, or just be friendly with people on the streets in Toronto in a way that people are not friendly with each other in Toronto. You know what I mean?
You're a better person now, Dave. You're a better person
it's just
this.
Different. Like people often say that Torontonians are rude or whatever. And people in Toronto are not rude. It's just
no.
It's a big city and you bump into people all day long and you can't be talking to everybody all day long. You're just not going to get anything done.
That's right.
There's a certain amount of anonymity that you require to actually get shit done in a day. It's not like living in a small town. Like, I can go over to the corner store and I can talk to 5 people along the way. It could make my trip 10 times longer than it needed to be. But that's just part of the lifestyle here. I don't need to get as much done either. I'm not in a rush to get to my office and worried about whether or not the subway is going to be shut down because of God forbid, incident at track level. You hear stories, what I mean? Like that kind of big city stuff that shuts that's going to make you late for work or whatever, or that drive that usually takes 15 minutes that, because of construction, takes an hour one day in Toronto. Like, that's different too.
Yeah,
it's just
that's like the traffic jam here would be. There's a tractor, so we got to go 20 instead of 60. For 5 minutes, not even 5 for 30 seconds as they go from one field to another. Yeah, so there's a vast difference between the city living and the rural living for sure. Well, here you can be driving down the road and there can be the traffic can slow down and it's somebody trying to get their cows off the road or. Right.
There's that kind of stuff, or just dogs running around on the highway and stuff like that, or some farmers coming through with their horses. That kind of, you see that kind of stuff, or people driving around on a motorcycle with a TV on the tank, holding that, you see
and the toddler in the other hand. Or
cars and trucks that are there's just no way that thing is roadworthy, that people are driving around on. There's I see people driving around with rags, they lost their gas cap, but they got paper towels crammed into the the gas tank as a cap, or
Molotov cocktail on wheels.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you see some pretty wild stuff, man. Everything's just very different. So I think I'm going to go back to Toronto and I'm going to be like, I'm going to feel like a bit of a yokel at first. So I'm going to be, I'm not going to feel like that big city dude who left there in October 2019. There's going to be a certain part of me that's going to be a small town guy. But it's interesting. I think in a way, you kind of joked about it earlier, but might be a better person for personally myself for having switched gears and done something different.
Sure, of course, yeah. So final words, like what is final words to anybody's listening who is still on the fence or contemplating or more interested in making the journey south to a different lifestyle for a little bit of the year or the whole year or whatever. Any words to them?
I think it's a lot of the stuff that we already touched on. I think you need to figure out whether or not you are somebody who can live in a place where the pace is slower, and if you're an A-type personality and you need everything done yesterday, maybe this isn't the place for you. You need to figure that out before you come down. The other thing is just that what we keep talking about over and over and over is that you need to do your homework and figure out what you're going to need to get done before you get here, or at least figure out, because we've had a bunch of friends who said, we're going to come down and look at a place in Place del Coco. And I'm like, well, that's cool. But, don't assume that this is necessarily your place because we picked it. Like you just said the same thing earlier. I mean, just because we like it here doesn't, even though we've got similar lifestyles and similar expectations or experiences because we're North Americans and because we've lived in big cities and because we worked in the same industry that you're going to come down here and this is going to be your thing. I need you to come down and check different areas out and figure out what you want and figure out whether or not you want to live. And like, it's hot here. It's, April and May are the hottest months of the year. And it can get up, up towards, on really hot days, it can get up, at 38, 39 degrees. And
that's with humidity too?
Yeah, it doesn't change. Yeah. Well, it's more humid. It gets hotter and a little bit more humid. This is a unique place. That's the thing, right? There's, like you talked about, there's different ecosystems all over this country. You can live up in the hills and live in an area where it's kind of like room temperature all year round. When you go outside, for people who don't like the heat too much, that's pretty cool. Here in our area, there are two seasons. There's the dry season and there's the green season. And in November, it stops raining in our area. And it really doesn't rain except for the odd little rainfall. And it's very seldom, but it doesn't really, it's dry for 6 months. It doesn't rain at all.
Wow.
Which is, and it's hot and it's dry, which is pretty cool. Because if you come and visit here, there's no stories about, well, I went to Playa del Coco for a week in January and it rained all week. That just doesn't happen. So at least you're going to come down here and it's going to be hot and it's going to be dry and you're going to be able to go to the beach every day and you're not going to get stuck in your place because it rained for a week. That's just not a thing. If you come down here after May, usually until, October, it rains every day, but it'll pour for, I don't know, like 45 minutes and then it'll stop and dry up and then you can go back out and enjoy your day. Some difference is if it's the rainy season, you're going to get mosquitoes. So you're going to get, in the green season, you're going to get mosquito bites and you're going to have to get used to that. And you're going to have to spray your legs before you go out to the bar at the end of, if you wanted to go out to watch the sun go down. You're going to have to spray your legs and stuff and to make sure you don't get bit too much. At some point you get more used to the mosquitoes like everywhere else, the bugs. But in the dry season in the winter, we can go out and sit on our patio all night and not worry about getting bit by mosquitoes because they're not around because there's no moisture for them to breed. So, these are all things, right? If you're going to live up in the hills in an area, or you're going to live in an area where, it's the rainforest and it's, there's more humidity, you're going to get more bugs. It's all that kind of research that you got to look into.
It's doing the homework. And talking to great people like you and Belinda, who are so open to have these discussions and offer this advice. And I can't thank you enough for everything all the advice and information you've given us. And I'm sure people who are listening who have been given the same advice from you as well. I can't say thanks enough for that because as much as it feels natural for you to do that, you'd be surprised. Not everybody is willing to be that open and giving. So kudos to you and Belinda for being those kind of people who are a great resource and hopefully, somebody who we'll be able to see when we get down there and rekindle a friendship. I really do appreciate everything you're giving in that regard.
Well, no, thanks for saying that. And the thing is, too, is I spent a lot of time talking to people before we came down here as well, right? I was constantly sending emails and texts to Roland before we came down, asking him very simple questions like, if we bought a house in a neighborhood that was a Tico neighborhood, do people want us to live there? Like, are people going to be friendly with us? And the answer to that is, yeah. Most people are going to be friendly with you, except for jerks. But there are jerks everywhere. People are generally, Costa Ricans are very nice. They're very kind people. But I don't know. I got to ask these questions before I move to a place. A lot of that stuff sounds like you feel like, oh, this is a dumb question, but there's no dumb questions. So I did a lot of that too. And I was constantly sending notes to Roland, asking him questions. I thought he must be getting annoyed by all these questions. But, he's a real estate agent and he benefits from people coming down here and purchasing houses. And that's all part of his job. So I asked a lot of questions and it's fun to talk about this stuff with people. And I just hope that anybody who does come down here and those people I know who did come down here and bought a place are not disappointed with their decision and their purchase. At the end of the day, we can give people a lot of information, and people make their own decisions, and they're adults. And if they come down here and they figure they made the wrong decision, well, that's on you. But I hope people don't feel that way, that we've given advice to, and we've talked the experience up. I hope people don't have that experience. But like I said, if you come down here and you buy a place or whatever, and you figure out it's not what you thought it was going to be, or you figure out that you aren't meant for this sort of lifestyle, you can always sell your place and do something else, But the big thing for us, I think, and just kind of, to encapsulate how I feel about all this, is when we decided that we were going to, and psychologically, this is a massive thing. When we decided that we were going to sell our piece of property in Toronto that we had worked so hard to pay for, and, that we had spent our lives, getting our careers to the place where we could afford this place or that place. And then all of a sudden we didn't own a place in Toronto anymore. That psychologically, that's a big thing, because that's that North American thing about safety and about, having your place and having, staking down finding your place in the world. When we gave that up, I felt like we made this huge leap without a parachute that felt so good in many ways, because I think in a lot of ways, the North American lifestyle, you do feel tethered, and you do feel sort of trapped into that idea of how you're supposed to live. That once we did that, and then living on a boat too, that's a different thing. I just kind of felt like once we had done that we could do anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if it didn't work out here, whatever, sell the place and we could live somewhere else. We could live, I don't know, maybe 10 years from now, we're living in Europe, or I don't know. But now, after making the jump from being somebody who was just a Canadian, a big city Canadian guy, and doing something different, I just feel like, now psychologically, we can do anything now. And even better, now that we can work wherever we want, as long as we want to work, we could do that too. So I feel like that was a big shift in mentality,
Absolutely. That's a huge, personal life experience the paradigm shift of your life. What a great inspirational story, really. I mean, to be able to make that leap and do it in such a way that both of you together are still smiling. That's a huge thing.
Like Bee's done this before. She was married, marriage didn't work out, started to reboot her life. She got herself her own car after, sharing a car or whatever. And then her own place, she owned a house there and stuff. And then somebody said, yeah, have you ever thought of coming to work over here? I have a job that's, and she was just like, yeah, maybe I'll try that. And she sold everything again after she had restarted her life, sold everything, put everything in a suitcase and moved to Canada by herself as a woman. Right.
Wow.
Which is pretty gutsy. So she's done this kind of thing before. And I always kind of felt like in the back of my mind, like I was just this, as much as I've done some pretty neat things and I've had a pretty cool career and got a chance to do all kinds of things that maybe a lot of other people haven't had experience because of the business that we live in, I always kind of felt like that, this Canadian guy who's always lived in the same place his whole life and hasn't really stretched himself or taken many risks. And I always felt kind of weird about that. Like, you've traveled and you've lived in a bunch of different places. I've lived in Ottawa and Toronto, and so to do something different like this kind of felt good for me. It felt like I was like, my world was opening up in a way that it hadn't been as open before. And I thought that was a pretty exciting thing to do. Okay.
So on that note, there's a lot of life ahead of us, right? Mm-hmm. We're in our early 50s. There's a lot of life ahead of us. Mm-hmm. Is there an idea, a notion of perhaps a new adventure on the horizon sometime, maybe 5-10 years down the road?
Yeah. Well, we were talking about that from the get-go. Like we were saying, we'll own this place in Costa Rica and people will, knock on wood, fingers crossed. I think people are always going to want to get away to a place like this. And so, our house, in the future, maybe instead of doing 6 months here, if we feel like doing something different, maybe we swap. Like I said, we swap properties, or we rent out our place and we go rent out a house in Spain or in Portugal, or maybe we go live in South Africa for 6 months or something. But now we have our property here that we could rent out, and somebody's always going to want to, rent a house here, and we could take off and do that and try that for 6 months. That's something that we've thought about. We haven't thought about packing everything up in a couple of years and doing something completely different, but we see the opportunity to rent our place out and try something new for 6 months somewhere else. If we're working, just kind of, how do the work hours jive with the work hours with clients back home and that kind of thing. That's a thing. I don't know if you want to be living somewhere where the business hours are all upside down and you got to work through the night and all that kind of stuff. But I think there's a lot of opportunities because, like I said, because somebody's always going to want to rent our house from us if we want to do that we have options.
Yeah. The options. And you've proven that obviously B has proven that she can do it. Mm-hmm. She's done it now twice in her life, big major shift. You've proven that you can do it. I would say you've done 2 major shifts. Selling the condo, moving onto a boat, that's huge. And then moving down there. So yeah, you've proven that you can do it. I guess it's just a question of what does life bring you in the future and what are you ready to do? And probably more open-minded to those new adventures. Yeah.
Well, we're lucky, man. We as the proverb goes, may you live in interesting times. We are living in interesting times, and we're part of a big shift, and we're taking advantage of it. I think a lot of other people can take advantage of this ability to live somewhere else and work somewhere else because of what's happened with the pandemic. But if you are willing to take some risks, the world is your oyster, I think. So this pandemic has been horrible in many ways, but there's also a lot of silver linings to what's happened here.
Biggest lesson in the past year for you?
The biggest lesson?
Yeah.
I think it's just maybe that you can take some risks, That's good to take some risks. That's good not to, I wouldn't say that we lived in fear, but that idea of, oh no, you can't sell that place in Toronto. It's worth too much money and it's going to be worth a lot of money in the future. And if you sell it now, how much could you hear that all the time. People are like, oh, you sold it and you got all kinds of money. Well, how much money could you have gotten it if you had sold in 3 years? Well, there's no guarantee I'm going to be alive in 3 years, first of all. Not because I'm, there's no guarantees for any of us. So, I think it's just, you have to, sometimes if you want, sometimes you just got to go for it. And so that's something that we did. And I'm glad we did that. And I don't regret it, because everything has worked out pretty well. But I think there's certainly something about not living in fear of, what tomorrow's going to bring, just kind of going for it,
Man, we're in cliche land, and for a good reason. That's a cliche that is so true. Just go for it. I think that's the best way to end this here is just go for it. For anybody who's thinking, like we are, like many people are, what's holding you back? Think about what's holding you back, and maybe it's just time to go for it.
Yep. It's not for everybody, but
not for everybody.
If you think you're going to be happier on the other side of this, then you should at least figure out whether or not you're right.
And if you're wrong, that's on you and nobody else.
Yeah.
Do your homework. Go for it, but do your homework.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's been the big lesson.
Well, thanks again, Dave, so much for giving me an opportunity to turn the tables on you and have you in the hot seat and ask the questions. How was it for you, by the way?
That was a lot of fun. And let me say that it's a real honor to be on your show. I know that millions of people listen to this podcast around the year, including, world leaders and luminaries and,
Stop.
and artists. And so I'm very excited to have been chosen to be on this podcast with you. So thank you very much for asking me to be on Cool Story with Papadopoulos.
the one and only episode.
Yeah. No, it's fun. It's fun to switch to switch places.
Well, I'm raising my glass of scotch here and cheering you for another 30 and more. And all the best, man.
Thanks. I appreciate it. And thank you very much for this experiment that we've undergone tonight. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Cheers, brother. There it is, my chat with Paul Papadopoulos. My thanks to Paul for turning the tables and interviewing me this time around on the podcast. It was a lot of fun. If you're enjoying the podcast and you would like to support the show, you can do so by making a small monthly pledge by visiting patreon.com/coolstory with David J. McNeil. Patreon being spelled Patreon. Your support would be greatly appreciated. Also, thank you once again to Mr. Jerry Stamp, who wrote and performed the Cool Story theme song and all of the jingles that appear on this show. Do yourselves a favor and look for Jerry's music wherever you stream. Then once you've checked out some of his music, go over and buy some and support Jerry. You can do that on iTunes. And finally, thank you for tuning in for this special episode dedicated to our great, great friend Jim Clark. Our hearts go out to Jim's beloved partner Nadine, as well as Jim's family and countless friends in the Toronto liveaboard and fishing community. On behalf of all of those people, I say, we will see you down the road, Jim. Make sure you've got some Labatt Blue on ice for when we get there.
Everybody's had some adventures. Everybody's had a few close calls. Everybody's got a story. What's yours?